Welcome to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. My name is Jamie Irvin, and today we are live. Did you know that we have a weekly podcast that we air every Monday morning? Head over to heavydutypartsreport.com to follow the show for free. Also, we are live today, so if you would like to participate in the conversation, we'd love to have you. By all means, make a comment, post a comment, ask a question. Happy to include you. We'll bring you up on the screen like this, and we would be very happy to have you participate. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about VMRS codes. What are they? How can parts companies use them to better serve fleets? And in order for us to get a full understanding of VMRS codes, I invited Jack Poster, VMRS Service Manager at the Technology and Maintenance Council of the American Trucking Association. Most people who follow the Heavy Duty Parts Report have heard about TMC because we talk about it so much. Jack's been in that position since 2007, so he has extensive experience, but that also comes behind 40 plus years in the transportation industry. Jack, I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome to the Heavy Duty Parts Report.
Hey, Jamie, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Anytime I can speak about VMRS, and I appreciate the invite. Glad to be here.
So let's get into it. What is VMRS codes for those who don't know? How long have they been in use? Just give us a quick overview of what it is.
I'll give you a quick history lesson, but first I want to tell you what the alphabet soup means. We're right outside of Washington, D.C., and we love the alphabet soup of all this stuff. So VMRS, Vehicle Maintenance, notice what I say, Reporting Standards. VMRS is a coding structure. Think of zip codes, think of area codes. I'm old enough to remember when there weren't zip codes or area codes. And that made things simpler for the post office and the phone company to move their data. VMRS is a methodology of communication for fleets and parts users. Okay, it's a coding convention. It's not computer software, it's coding convention. Okay, let me give you a quick history. We'll go back to 1969. I'll give you a few facts. Richard Nixon's president, Woodstock Music Festival, Neil Armstrong walks on the moon. I graduated high school, and ATA developed VMRS.
Don't forget some of the best muscle cars ever made were manufactured
exactly,
that year.
You're right. 1969, it was a great time to be a senior in high school, let me tell you. So at that point, the fleet managers got together and said, we need one unified method of communication. Because as you know, most fleets have multiple locations. So how do we keep everybody on the same page, speaking the same language? Well, they all got together, a group of professionals, and they thought about this process, and they came up with this coding structure of using the same terminology to describe a given part, a labor function, an asset, a reason for repair, why did a part fail? So I always use the analogy, I hope you could see behind me, I have some guitars. It's the musical notes of maintenance. You can bring in half a dozen musicians, put them in a room, nobody speaks the same language, and put a music of Bach, Beatles, whatever, they'll play the notes. Why? Musical notes, cuts across that language. So that's what we like to think of VMRS. VMRS was used pretty much pen and paper up until the mid to late 90s, when what hit? Fleet maintenance software. And that's when VMRS took off, because the major the fleet maintenance software firms embedded it into their software. Okay? And that's when fleets started using it and started to see how it worked and how it helped. So
okay, so let's enter 1998. A young Jamie Irvin, fresh out of school, gets into the trucking industry, and from 1998 to 2016, I sold parts most of that time, with the exception of the few years that I was running my other business, and I never once heard the fleets or anybody I was selling to talk about VMRS codes. And yet in the last couple of years, it seems to be that I hear it over and over and over again. So in that time period from the 90s, when the software came in, until a couple years ago. Why was VMRS not in the vernacular of most aftermarket parts companies?
Good question. The biggest change that occurred traditionally, a fleet or end user would buy a part from the parts store, distributor, the OE, direct, however they were purchasing their parts. When the parts arrived at the fleet or the end user, they would enter in the VMRS code. They would be the ones that would take and I'll get a little more into what the VMRS code actually is, but they would take the part, assign the VMRS code into their system. That was it. Several years ago, some of the larger fleets and even some of the smaller and mid-sized fleets have gone to the parts manufacturers, the sellers, the distributors, and said, we would like you to offer those to us when you give us our invoicing, or however they're getting their information, flat files, be it however they're getting that information. So that's when my phone started ringing. I would get a call from the president of XYZ, and he would go, what's this VXY? What is this stuff?
ABC 123. What
Once
the heck are
again,
they talking about?
alphabet soup. So admittedly, VMRS was first developed for fleet use. That's the main gist of where VMRS was developed for. But it's morphed over the years where the manufacturers now see that their customers are asking for it. So when you're a parts house or distributor and a very large fleet with a couple thousand units comes in and says, you the manager? Yes. Can you offer us the VMRS codes? It pays to either know about the VMRS codes or find out quickly how you can get a hold of me so I can educate you. But the tables, that's going on now. And a lot of them, the parts manufacturers are even finding it helps in their own system also.
Right. So for people who have never even heard of this before, let's just explain. It's it's not like a VIN number with
Right.
alphanumeric.
Right.
Just so people understand, how many digits is it, and how is the actual code structured?
Well, let me give a quick overview of what VMRS actually is. VMRS is made up of 65 code keys, which is an old 70s computer term. It's really code sets.
Mhm.
So think of VMRS in these terms. There are codes to define assets. So if you're a fleet and you're putting together a vehicle birth certificate on a certain piece of equipment, there are codes to do that. There are codes to define what's under the hood. Is it a sleeper? Is it a cab over? To define the cab itself, the length of the trailer, the width of the trailer, how many axles, so there are codes for that. There are also codes to define the part, and that's what we're going to mainly talk about, the 9-digit component code, which is called code key 33.
Okay.
That code augments an OE part number. It doesn't replace it, but that is what most people, when they think of VMRS, they think of that 9-digit component code. But also within VMRS, there are codes to define the labor, what the technician did, and also the failure codes, multiple codes like that. So you brought up the VIN number. You can use VMRS. I came up with a MIN number, a maintenance identification number. The
Okay.
end user can build out their own MIN number by stringing along the certain VMRS code keys or code sets. And here's what's unique about VMRS and what makes it interesting. Every user is different. You know this. You've been in the business for many years. Our users know every fleet is different. Every fleet. So you can tailor VMRS to your own business needs, your own model. You can pick and choose what VMRS code keys fit into your business model and use those to keep track of your equipment. So that's pretty much VMRS in a nutshell. It's a string of 65 different code keys with multiple codes within there. Now let's go back to that component code database. There are over 34,000 component codes listed in VMRS as of today. There's codes from work shoes to from brake drums to slack adjusters, to you name it, there are codes in there.
Right. So let me ask you about that. So slack adjusters, it has this 9-digit code.
Yes.
Is that code going to be the same for like an AS1140 gunite slack and an AS1132? They're both automatic slacks. They're both in the same category, so they're going to have the same VMRS code, or is the
Yes.
code different by part number?
No. It's description to description. The VMRS code is equipment neutral. So it doesn't matter if, well, let's use a brake drum because that fits multiple. It doesn't matter if that's the F-150 you drove to work, or the Toyota Prius you might have at home, or the Freightliner Cascadia you have sitting at where you're working on, or a pack, So it cuts across equipment. The VMRS code is the code. It does not change per manufacturer. Now, within VMRS, there's a manufacturer, supplier, and brand code file, around 11,000 different manufacturers. Each manufacturer has their own 5-letter alpha character unique to them. So you can string that along in your main identification number. You can put the VMRS code in and then put next to it in that string where you purchased it. So
So
that's the other thing.
so would that apply, that would apply only to like truck OE and trailer OE, or is that also parts manufacturers? So what I'm
Parts
getting at is,
manufacturer,
could we
anything.
have a code, 5-digit code for gunite followed by the VMRS code, 9-digit code for slack adjuster?
Yes, it could be
Okay.
any. It could be a local parts house in your city, your town. We
Oh,
Here's
okay.
the other thing to remember, the listeners, about VMRS. We're always adding new codes as needed. I deal with the company that we were just talking about in Alberta. It's a worldwide fracking company. They have locations worldwide, and they rely on that manufacturer's number because they're buying parts all over the world, and they have multiple locations. They wanted one way of describing where did we buy that part. And we live in a point and click world. So VMRS, and this is another thing that fascinates me, back in the late 60s, early 70s, that the people that found it, that put this together, would think that it would morph right into the computer world. So it's a point and click world. You click, if you bought that from company X, here's the code, you're done. You don't have to misspell. You don't have to stand and labor over typing in the part, the manufacturer. It's right there in your drop down.
And I see why that's so important, because if I'm a fleet and I'm a national carrier, and normally I'm purchasing through a national program, but then my truck is in, Boise, Idaho, and broken down on the side of the road, and a mobile mechanic comes out and replaces a part that maybe came from a different supplier.
Mhm.
Everybody is putting descriptions and part number prefixes and suffixes a
Yep.
little different,
Hmm.
and so maybe it's got the same root number that goes back to the OE manufacturer's part number for that component.
Yeah.
But like I said, there could be a different prefix, a different suffix, a different description.
Yeah.
You have a VMRS code, and it just eliminates the concern over that different description, let's say, on the invoice, because the code matches. And so then internally for the fleet, it just makes the whole process a lot simpler.
Yeah, and there's a logic behind the VMRS code, the component code. As much as I like the OEs and the parts manufacturers, is there really a logic behind? Their engineering staff might know, but when you look at that part number on a box, it's you can't decipher it by looking at it. And like you said, if you miss a hyphen in a part number, or is it caps or non? Is it lowercase? It can skew the whole all your reporting. So when you're looking at a 9-digit VMRS code, it stays the same. There's nothing
Yeah,
else.
and the manufacturers and parts distribution companies often work in silos. So you may have 3 procurement managers at a parts distribution company, each responsible for several categories of parts.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden you can have a situation where one silo is putting the dash here, and
Uh-huh.
the other silo in a different category but similar parts is not. And the
Mhm.
description, one is capitalized and one isn't, and one is complete, and like it's so easy for that to happen over time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And really the tools haven't been all that good up until recently for companies to manage that. So the code itself is that universal language.
Yes, and let me I'll take a couple minutes here and explain the logic and how the VMRS, the component code, is built. what happened years ago is we took a piece of equipment and split it into not 10 systems, okay? 0 through 9. So let's talk about brakes. That's the easiest one. And like I told you earlier, I don't know these by heart. I never learned these there's 34,000 codes. So people ask me all the time,
You've only got 32,000 memorized, right?
yes, exactly. What's the code for this? And I look at them and I go, you got to be kidding. I don't know any of these. I know one or two. So in VMRS, 013 always defines the brake system.
Mhm.
Always. It does. Once again, it doesn't matter what type of piece of equipment. It could be a forklift. It could be a converter dolly. It could be anything. 013. Then we took that's the top level. Then we divided it up a little bit closer. Next level, the assembly. 013001. Common sense, front brakes. So all front brake parts are housed in 013001. Doesn't matter. Let me go to the next level, 013002. Common sense, rear brakes, and so forth. So we went through the pieces of equipment and divided them up. And I'll just run through them real quick. If it's a Z, and it's always X1X. So anything that has a 1 in the middle of the first 3 digits is chassis related. If it's a 0, it's cab, climate control, and it's instrumentation. So for example, all AC parts, 001. 0 designates cab, climate control, instrumentation. Drivetrain, 2. So X2X, 023, for example, is a clutch parts. 3, X3X, electrical group. 031, charging. And I mean, I can go through it, but that's how it's broken down. So the last 3 digits, let's go back to the brake drum. 013, 001, 024. I know this one by heart. That's a front brake drum. So there's a logic there. Brakes, oh, we know it's 013, 001, front
Front
brakes. Now,
axle.
the last 3 digits are in numeric order. There's no logic there. But that's how the VMRS code comes about. And that's the logic behind it.
And that gives you that 9-digit code that then can be provided from the parts company to the fleet, so the fleet
Yes.
knows what they're getting.
Now, here's the other.
Regardless of part number, description, or
Doesn't
manufacturer.
matter. Doesn't matter. It could have an umlaut on top. It could have apostrophes. It could have numerous different punctuation. That code sits. Now, here's the other interesting part. Some fleets don't want to get as granular to go to the component. So on their reporting, they will say, well, let's just go to 013001.
Just the 6-digit part
Just
of that 9-digit code.
that alone gives them enough information that they can run a daily report. They can run a weekly, monthly, yearly. They can go by, and you always defer back to the equipment number. People ask me that, well, the equipment number comes first. You gotta base everything off of that. Okay. But you can pull up that piece of equipment and look, wow, we spent $6,000 last quarter on brakes on this vehicle. Now, it might not tell you the exact components that you looked at, but if you're using the 6 digits and you're spending a lot of money, you might want to go to your people and say, okay, starting next week, we're going to the component level because we need to figure out what's eating our lunch here. What are we spending all this money on? And you can tie that into the piece of equipment, the make, the model, what's going on. So it lets you see trends really quickly. Because what does a computer understand? Numbers. Makes it easy. So, and you can do that throughout the whole gamut of the component codes. You can use 9 digits,
Right.
you can use 6 digits.
It would also help the heavy duty parts company because then they could look at categories.
Exactly.
That was always a challenge that I had. I would say to the company I was selling for, I want to know, like, how much market share do I have in my area? How much am I selling in brakes. And they would say, well, we can tell you by the category, but that's going to give you a lot of data, because we're going to have to tell you, what brake shoes and the 3 different manufacturers that we sell, the 6 different manufacturers of drums. We have different manufacturers for the repair kits. And it just like all of a sudden it was too much data to be useful.
Yeah.
So at least with the codes, you'd be able to bring that down to those 6-digit codes and just say, give me like, how are we doing in each major category, and go from there. Now, I was going to ask you about where a person could find some of these codes. So I know that a sponsor of our podcast is Diesel
Mhm.
Parts. They've added VMRS codes up to the 6-digit on
Mhm.
most of the part numbers in their database. That's one resource. But where's a good resource to get access to the VMRS codes?
Well, here's the one thing that if you are at a fleet, let me back up. A lot of people are using VMRS in the fleet world and don't even realize it. They don't know, because like that old spaghetti sauce commercial, we're in there. Uh, there was another commercial, BASF. I don't know if people remember that. They said, "We don't make the product, we make it better." Well, that's what I like to think of VMRS. If you're using pretty much any major fleet maintenance software, you're using VMRS. VMRS is licensed through the American Trucking Association.
Okay.
But I can help. I encourage people to get in touch with me, because even if you don't license it, your customers might be using it, and at least you want to have some knowledge about it. But there is a good resource. Is we do offer a implementation handbook. That's not. It's through our. I can let people know then. But that is available for purchase. That gives you all the information on VMRS. So, but that's the main resource where it's available. Although people can contact me if they're interested in licensing it.
Yeah, and we'll put a link at the end of our episode. I got one more question for you. Where is VMRS going in the future? How is it going to change?
Well, as people could see, I didn't think I'd get any more white hair, but the latest area. This is the most exciting for me, and really been not a tough slog, but an interesting slog, are the EV codes, electric vehicle codes. I'm lucky enough in my position. I'm lucky to work with the OEs and the manufacturers a year or two prior to the advent of the equipment. So, for example, early on, I was working on the SCR codes, the DEF codes, lane departure, hydrogen fuel cells, things like that. So I get a little jump on everything. I get to see behind the door, see what's going on. So right now,
You see
EV,
around the corner at what's coming.
yes, I can see it. EV is the latest area that's really hitting us, taking everything by storm. It's a whole new world. It's interesting. What we're doing is any new code that goes into VMRS that's electric vehicle related has in the description electric vehicle. I encourage people that are currently using VMRS to really take a look at the description and make sure that you're using the right description. But yeah, that's the latest, and a lot of the ADAS, the driver assisted systems, those have already existed, but we're adding on and supplementing. Like I said, with VMRS, we're always adding new codes. I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. A couple of years ago, I got a call from a user, and he said, I like VMRS, but there's no code for masking tape. And I said, there has to be. And he said, no, I'm telling you, there's no code. So I went and looked through, and I can never say this right, the conspicuity tape. We had every type of tape. We had Scotch tape. Darn it, we had no masking tape. So I came back on the phone. I said, I hate to tell you, you were right. So my job is then to enter in that new code. So, 15, 20 minutes later, I got back to the fella. I said, here's the code for masking tape. So that becomes part of the database when I add new codes in.
So I can see how important VMRS codes will be moving forward for parts distribution companies, especially as they go more and more into a digital sales channel. You can use VMRS codes to better serve the fleets, because you can have more accurate information, and you can provide the information to the fleets in a system they're already using.
Yes.
And so it's just going to any parts distribution company that uses VMRS codes to um, work with their fleets, they're just going to be the preferred supplier, because it's going to be easier to do business with them because the codes are there, and that's going to make the life of the fleet easier. and it's all about that customer
Yeah.
buying experience. So if you can accomplish that, then it's going to be good for your business and it's going to be good for the fleets.
Yeah, in fact, when I started at TMC in 2007, a couple months in, I asked one of my bosses, I said, look, I'd like to go to a fleet and see VMRS in action. Great. They sent me to what I call a power user. They're great people. They're in South Carolina. Great barbecue, great visit. So I went there and I asked at the time the manager of service, I said, so when the parts come in, would you like to see on an invoice a VMRS code? He said, I'd hug and kiss them if they could do that. So that ended. And then for years, nothing occurred. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I started getting phone calls from parts manufacturers, presidents, CEOs of manufacturers, distributors going, what is this VSM? What is this thing?
Yeah.
And admittedly, it was never part of the parts manufacturer distributors world. It was traditionally the part would enter into the fleet would enter the code. Well, some of the bigger fleets and even the mid-sized fleets have said to the manufacturers, we want you to provide us the VMRS code. So quite a few have taken the leap and have added it to their invoicing. And you'll also see more and more are adding it to their online presence too.
Yeah.
They want that in there because even if a owner operator with 1 or 2 vehicles, you want to know what you're spending your money on. And if you're doing your own books, VMRS sort of can help in that regard by giving you one method of defining what you're buying. But the parts stores, there was reluctance, but more and more are coming on board because, like you said, if a fleet comes in, you want to at least have the knowledge or to say, we're not using it now, but I know how I can get a hold of the guy and we can start doing it for you. But you're right. A
Exactly.
lot of the fleets want the communication from the service provider or the parts store to them using the VMRS code, at least including it. It doesn't take the place of the part number. It augments it. So,
You've been listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin. We've been speaking with Jack Poster, VMRS Services Manager at the Technology and Maintenance Council of the American Trucking Association. To learn more about TMC, go to trucking.org, and you can learn all about that amazing organization that supports fleets and the trucking industry. Jack, thanks you so much for being on the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Jamie. Take care.
All right, take care. So that brings to a conclusion another live stream. And I just wanted to let you know that next week I'm going to be in Las Vegas at the Apex show. So we're not going to have a live broadcast on the Heavy Duty Parts Report. You could always check out my personal profile for a couple of live streams of being at the show. We will be back live on the Heavy Duty Parts Report November 12th, where we're going to talk about fleet guidelines for purchasing parts. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great weekend. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.